This is the Motherlands podcast. The intention of this podcast is to provide evidence-based information related to fertility, pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum, as well as share positive birth stories. I am your host, Keely Semler. There is a well-known quote, "If you want to make God laugh, tell him about your plans." It highlights the truth that we all get to co-create our existence. And sometimes life hits us with something unexpected. Lina Bardovi reveals the path that initially led her to Chinese medicine was both heart-opening and heartbreaking. Lina found her calling to Chinese medicine in her 20s when she discovered that her boyfriend had brain cancer, and the one treatment that seemed to make him feel better was acupuncture. In this episode, we discuss how all humans are a delicate balance of yin and yang energy, the importance of the 5 elements within the body, as well as the 5 pathogens according to traditional Chinese medicine. Lina discloses that she is currently pregnant and shares how she is prepared for pregnancy. We discuss everything from nutrition to morning sickness to postpartum healing. The easiest way to support the Motherlands podcast is to leave a rating and a review. It means a lot to me, and it inspires me to keep going. Thank you again for listening. We are here today in Santa Monica with Lina Bardovi in her beautiful studio, Resonant Healing in Santa Monica. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
I'm so curious how you came into this work in Chinese medicine and acupuncture. What initially drew you into this practice?
Yeah, so for me, it was a complete left field career pivot. I was not in the health world whatsoever.
What were you doing before?
I was working at a tech startup in operations. Yeah,
wow.
So very different. And I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do forever, but I didn't know what was. I hadn't found my thing yet. So I was doing that, and it got to a point one day where I was like, I know this isn't my thing. I'm ready to find out what is, and it's not just gonna come to me. So my boyfriend at the time was also going through similar feelings of not being super happy with his career. And so we decided to basically quit everything. We had saved up some money. We got rid of our apartment and we bought a van. And we did the whole van life thing.
Oh my gosh, if my partner was listening right now, he's going to be so impressed with you. That's his dream.
Yeah, it was our dream too. It was really amazing.
How brave of you too to just quit and go, all right, let's reset.
We were in our mid-20s and we were like, if not now, then when? So we did it. It felt like jumping off a cliff. And we had planned to do an 8-month-long trip around the whole country. We mapped out a route. And we got about 3 months into our trip. And I woke up in the middle of, we were in a national forest in Mississippi. And I woke up to my boyfriend having a seizure. So long story short, we rushed to the closest hospital and found out over the coming week or so that he had a tumor in his brain. And so we flew back home to L.A. to meet with doctors and assemble a team and everything. And he was scheduled for brain surgery pretty much the next week. And turns out that it was brain cancer. So went through chemo, radiation, all the treatment. And as part of his treatment, alongside all of the Western treatments, his mom actually had suggested acupuncture. In one of his seizures, he had fractured 3 vertebrae in his spine, and there was nothing that his Western doctors could do. They said, you just really need to rest, and it should heal on its own. But he was in quite a lot of pain, so his mom was like, let's try acupuncture. He had gone and he came home, and I just remember him being so excited about his experience, and he had felt relief within one treatment. There was something there. And so I became really fascinated by it. Growing up, my mom had taken me to a Chinese herbalist, so I had experience with Chinese medicine, but I had never had acupuncture before. And so I became kind of obsessed. I was going down all the rabbit holes, doing all the research.
Well, learning. I can't imagine having a partner going through something so traumatic, and to see them come back from one session of an acupuncturist and feel some relief.
Yeah, it was pretty remarkable. It ended up being like his favorite part of the week. You know, fast forward, he ended up getting treatments twice a week for the rest of his life. He ended up passing away, but it became his favorite part of the week. And, you know, he was going to so many doctors, and he had wonderful care, both Western and Eastern, but you could really feel the difference of how he felt seen during like one of his acupuncture sessions. So that's kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but that's kind of how I got interested in it. And I had listened to a podcast, I don't remember which one, but they were talking about how, like, if you don't know what you want to do in life, like, follow the path of what you find yourself Googling at night.
I love that.
Yeah. And I had heard that kind of around that time. And I was like, that makes sense to me. That's like, you know, that's how you know something's a passion of yours, if you are spending your personal time looking into it. And so that kind of gave me a little bit of permission to like actually consider doing it as a career. And I had, you know, since like experienced some acupuncture sessions to see what it was all about myself. I basically enrolled in a program right then and there. Like, I think I started my first quarter of school 2 months after Atticus had his brain surgery. So it was a 4 years master's degree program. It's a really intense program, a lot more intense than I was anticipating, but it makes sense because there's so much to this medicine. I was in school during the last 2 years of his life, and it was an amazing like grounding force in a time that my life was just a complete mess. And it was a really supportive community. You know, people who are drawn to becoming acupuncturists are very empathetic, caring, wonderful humans. So I got to be part of a lovely community that really carried me through a hard time. And also just learning about the body from both a Western and an Eastern perspective really helped me kind of understand, I guess, what was going on with him in a different way and support him in a different way. And
he went through surgery, and then did that help at all? Or
yeah, so he had surgery and they removed 3 small-ish masses. He had glioblastoma, which is a pretty aggressive form of brain cancer, and he then went through chemo and a round of radiation. And things were looking okay. And then, you know, over the course of a couple months, we started to notice some small things like in his speech.
Aww.
And he started to have seizures again. And so we kind of, you know, had a feeling that something was going on still. And he was getting routine MRIs. And so at the next MRI that he had gotten, so he had surgery in June, and by January, the MRI had revealed that it had come back.
I can't imagine how chaotic and emotionally taxing that must have been for you.
It was a roller coaster, and the uncertainty was really hard. And also, I mean, no cancer is good, but brain cancer, it's devastating. I mean, depending on what part of your brain it's in, affects how you move through the world and how you experience the world. And so for him, it was in the language part of his brain. So his speech was the first thing to go, and words started becoming harder. And so then, you know, as caregivers and support and a girlfriend, you know, family members, we had to start kind of deciphering what he was trying to communicate. And then as it spread more and more, you know, the whole right side of his body started to become a little bit weaker, and so walking was harder. You know, it's just like this evolution where every day is a new thing, and it was, you know, it's hard to see a loved one go through that, and not quite knowing exactly what you can do to support it other than just be there. That's the biggest lesson that I learned, or one of, there's many big lessons I learned, but one of the lessons was just being present and showing love and care.
Yeah, that's huge. I don't know, we all walk around here as if we're going to be here forever, as if nothing can go wrong or sideways, and being around someone in close proximity of someone where they really are straddling life and death, it really kind of makes you cherish and appreciate any and all time we have with each other.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure it made you restructure how you spend your time and what you're even interested in investing in.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it fundamentally changed who I am as a person, for sure.
Yeah, how can it not?
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing that's how you became interested and came out of love and caring for someone. It's really special.
It's really special, and I feel like it was his gift to me. And every single day when I come into the studio, I do a little meditation, and he's part of that meditation. And so he's very much still a part of me and my practice, and it's this connection that I still have with him, which feels very special.
That is super sweet. I'm sure he is alive in your practice, and that's really, really special. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Can you briefly describe some of the main principles of Chinese medicine? And I know that's a loaded question because there are so many layers, but just sort of the basics. I know there are different elements, and maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, totally. Yes, it's a very complex medicine, but I also like to say it's kind of an intuitive medicine because it's very much based in nature. And so we all operate in this world, and we all know that fire is hot and flares upwards. So there's aspects to it that are kind of intuitive. But yes, you're correct. There are elements that we use. But I would say, like, if we're talking about the foundations of Chinese medicine, Yin and Yang is like probably the first place to start. And then we also have what you were kind of alluding to is 5-element theory.
Well, first, can you explain Yin and Yang? Because I know everyone knows those words, but maybe they don't really understand the deeper meaning of it.
So Yin is the more restorative, feminine, dark, nighttime qualities of the body. The character in Chinese for Yin is the shady side of the mountain, whereas Yang is the sunny side of the mountain. So that's more heat, sunlight, daytime, masculine, energy. So it's kind of like the dichotomy between two things, and they're always shifting and they're interconnected. So if you know of the classic Tai Chi symbol, the Yin and Yang symbol, there's Yin within Yang and there's Yang within Yin, and one is transforming into the other. So they mutually need each other.
So we are all cycling through Yin and Yang.
We all have Yin and Yang. That's why we are alive. When we die, Yin and Yang separate. And Yin goes kind of into the earth. That's the more like earthly aspect, whereas Yang is the more like ethereal light, and that kind of goes upwards. And so they're always doing this dance together, and ideally they're always in balance. So some health stuff that can arise can sometimes be due to either like a yin deficiency or a yang deficiency, where one of them has become imbalanced in relation to the other.
Do you see within your own practice, specifically with women, females, that there can be more of a deficiency in one over another? I'm just thinking like the modern woman is so busy. She's just go, 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 do.
Yeah.
You know, do you see that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the classical like way you can think of what a yin deficient person looks like is somebody going through menopause. That's textbook yin deficiency. So we have a lack of that like cooling, restorative energy of the body, the yin. We have relative heat. So like hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia, anxiety, irritability. Those are all yin deficiency signs. Generally speaking, I see yin deficiency in women and I see yang deficiency in women. So yang deficiency might look more like hypothyroid symptoms where things are sluggish, right? We have a lack of the like warming, energizing forces of the body, like the metabolism is kind of subdued. So that's classically, you can think of a hypothyroid presentation where, you know, fatigue, low energy, running cold, holding on to excess water. I see both. The like modern woman who's doing so much is definitely depleting her yin. So you can think of like a yin yoga class, right? Like that's a very restorative yoga class. And when we're kind of in that hyper yang state all the time where we're doing and always on the go, we can kind of burn through our yin.
That's so interesting. So how does that fit in with the elements?
Yeah, so then we have 5-element theory, which is kind of separate but also includes Yin and Yang theory. So the 5-element theory, we have 5 elements, and we have these 5 Zong organs that we call, which are kind of like main organs, and then they have their yin-yang pair. So the 5 organs that are the yin organs of the body are the heart, the spleen, the lungs, the kidney, and the liver. And then they have their yang pairing. So each one of those has a pair. The heart is paired with the small intestine, the spleen is paired with the stomach, kidney is bladder, liver is gallbladder, lung and large intestine. And so each one of those 5 pairings resonates with an element found in nature. So we have the heart and the small intestine resonate with the fire element. The spleen and stomach, which you can kind of think of as like your digestive system, are the earth element. Kidneys and bladder are the water element. Lung, large intestine are the metal element. And then liver and gallbladder are the wood element. So it's kind of a lot to remember, but
beautiful.
Yeah.
Like the pairings, and like it does make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can kind of start to understand how each organ system operates within the body by looking at its element, and you can start to understand how each organ system relates to another organ system by its element pairing. So I think this is the easiest example to understand, just to put it into practice so that people can like understand, okay, how does this have to do with my health, is looking at the wood earth interaction. So that would be the liver and the spleen. And so basically IBS is a really good example of what a wood earth imbalance might look like. Stress or any kind of like traumatic emotional event can take a toll on the liver. The liver is responsible for the free flow of energy in the body. It sets the tone of the chi flow. And so if the liver becomes stuck or stagnant, which it's very prone to, you can kind of think of like a traffic jam on the freeway. We call that liver chi stagnation. And you can think about the energy of stress, right? It kind of just stagnates everything. You have tense shoulders, you get a little like irritable and frustrated. It's a very stuck, stagnant energy. And so when that happens, according to 5-element theory, there's a diagram that helps to make this make more sense if you're looking at it visually, but basically the relationship between wood and earth is one that's a controlling relationship. And so when the liver element becomes out of balance, it becomes too stuck and stagnant, it can overact on the digestive system and cause a digestive episode. So that's kind of like where you can think of IBS, right? Like usually people who have some form of IBS, it can be exacerbated by an emotional thing or a stressful event. And so bringing that back to the more 5-element theory of things, if you think about a pot with a plant in it, so the plant would be the wood element, which is liver, and the pot would be the earth element, which would be spleen or digestive system. When that plant becomes root bound or it becomes too big for that pot, stuck, stagnant energy, it can eventually like crack the pot. So that's how we would look at like a wood overacting on earth imbalance or a liver overacting on spleen imbalance.
Such a good visualization too. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
What are channels or meridians?
Yeah. So channels, meridians, we kind of use the terms interchangeably. Originally in the classical texts, they were called rivers. And so you can kind of think of them as rivers. I like to think of them as rivers still. But basically, we have blood vessels, we have nerves. You can kind of think as channels as like an energetic component. Usually they run alongside major blood vessels or nerves, and they carry what we call chi, which loosely translates to energy. It's not the best translation, but for simplicity's sake, you can think about it as energy. You can also think about it as like your vital life force, the innate intelligence in your body. But these meridians, rivers, channels carry this energy, and each one goes home to an organ. So you have the liver channel, you have the spleen channel, you have the heart channel, kidney channel, so on and so forth. And you can use points along these channels, kind of like exit or entry points, to manipulate the flow of chi in the channel itself. So taking the example of IBS example that we just talked about, in that case, we would want to help move that liver qi. And so we would choose points along the liver channel that are very moving or circulating. Whereas the spleen, the digestive system, is in more of a state of deficiency. So we'd want to choose points along the spleen channel that help to tonify or nourish.
And when you say you choose a point, is that where you're putting the needle in to let... to open it up, or how does that work?
To basically just stimulate that point. There are different techniques that you can do. There's so many different ways of practicing. Really what it boils down to is we're stimulating a point and kind of nudging the body to say, okay, hey, we're moving energy here, or we're nourishing some energy here.
So when you see a female patient, what are some interesting meridians or channels that you're looking for to help her become more balanced in her cycle, let's say?
Yeah. So the beautiful thing about Chinese medicine is that everybody is so different.
Right.
And so we can get really individualized with what is going on for that specific person, their specific imbalance. So it's hard to make generalizations, but there are channels that are more commonly related to, say, hormonal imbalances. The liver is a big one. The liver really governs a lot of, specifically the PMS time of the month. So again, going back to that stuck or stagnant energy, the liver is so prone to cramping, irritability, breast tenderness. Those are all liver qi stagnation signs. So if you experience those kinds of PMS symptoms, most likely we're going to be regulating the liver channel. For somebody who is experiencing very light periods or late periods, we might look more towards what we call blood deficiency. And so in that case, we might choose points that are along the spleen channel, also the liver channel, maybe the heart channel, because those are the 3 organs that are involved in blood. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of how it can be so different based on what the person is experiencing in their individual constitution. But yeah.
Sure, because this is kind of an oversimplistic, way of looking at it, I'm sure. But if someone has cycle imbalance, it could be another organ system that is also playing into that imbalance, right?
Yeah.
And that is entirely unique to that individual patient,
Exactly. Yeah. For people who experience night sweats around their period, we'd look to the kidneys usually for that. You can treat almost any organ system can be involved in a hormonal imbalance. It's just what is that person experiencing. Yeah.
What about fertility? What about a patient that is coming to you interested in potentially trying to conceive? Are there any ways that you would provide support to them?
Yeah. So again, we would start with what's going on with their constitution. What are they coming in with? Maybe it's not even fertility related, but maybe they've had a history of digestive issues. We would want to take that into consideration. But if we're just talking generally, somebody comes into my studio and they're relatively healthy and they just want support with trying to conceive, we look to the kidney channel for that a lot.
Why the kidney?
I know, it doesn't make sense from a Western mind.
Huh?
Yeah. So that's also the thing that is helpful to keep in mind is there are a lot of overlaps from our Western viewpoint of what the kidneys do, but there are a lot of differences too. And Chinese medicine takes emotions into consideration. It takes the more spiritual aspect of things into consideration. It takes the energetics of things into consideration. So, we think about kidneys from a Western standpoint and we're what does that have to do with fertility? From a more Chinese medicine standpoint, they carry what we call our Jing. And Jing is a really hard concept to explain, but it translates loosely into our essence. A lot of people call it our DNA or our blueprint in life. We inherit it from our parents, so it's kind of our hereditary bloodline, I guess, if you will. But it's also kind of a battery pack of the body, so a lot of our energy is stored there. We can deplete our Jing by, that image of the modern woman that you kind of described of working, doing like intense HIIT workouts, drinking coffee on an empty stomach, just the like fight or flight state, that can impact our Jing, which has a big tie to our fertility. It's kind of like, you can think of egg quality almost, or sperm quality. So we look to the kidneys to really help like nurture that Jing, and also yin and yang. There's this concept of fire that is held between the kidneys. It's like our pilot light almost. And so we choose kidney points to help nurture that fire as well as the Jing. So that's kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. And I apologize if that wasn't the clearest explanation of like what the kidneys encompass, but they really are like the root of the body in Chinese medicine. So there's a big importance, much more than Western medicine would attribute to the kidneys, in fertility in Chinese medicine for the kidneys.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What about nutrition? Do you chat with your clients at all about nutrition as it relates to female health?
Yeah, nutrition is one of my passions. I love talking nutrition.
And I love watching your videos because you eating liver just inspires me to eat more liver.
I know.
Or what else did you do recently? I don't know. I love your videos about, it's like, oh yeah, she's right. Just eat the liver.
I know, it's a little intense, but honestly, it's a magical food. Yeah, so nutrition is a big component of Chinese medicine. We actually look at the energetics of food too in Chinese medicine. So we look at its properties. Is it warming? Is it cooling? Does it clear heat? Does it tonify? Does it move? So there are a lot of energetic properties to food that we learn about from a Chinese medicine perspective that can be really medicinal. From a more like women's health or fertility standpoint, I really like to focus on like nutrient-dense foods. From a Chinese medicine perspective, we would say these are blood and qi nourishing foods. When we are hoping to conceive or already pregnant, or especially postpartum, it's really important to focus on our nutrient reserves and build up the qi and blood that we have in our body, because pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, the whole postpartum time is a really blood and qi depleting state for a woman to be in. And so nutrition is paramount. It's really important. You can get all the acupuncture treatments in the world, but you can't make something out of nothing. You need to be consuming food. I work a lot with food. Almost all of my patients, I am making food recommendations. Yeah.
That's really, really interesting and amazing that you are able to kind of look at it very holistically, because you're right, you're working with a body, but that body is coming in here for an hour, and there's so many other things they can do to improve the state of their body when they're on your table. That's really interesting. How would someone implement better nutrition or blood building, as you said, or build their
blood and qi nourishing foods?
How does someone do that when they're sick, when they have morning sickness? How does someone implement those?
Yeah, it's a good question. I am actually in my second trimester myself, and I just experienced this firsthand. The first trimester can be rough.
Yes.
And yeah, it was something that was really hard for me to grapple with, because I know so much about nutrition, and I had this idea going into trying to conceive of like, oh, I'm going to have the healthiest pregnancy. I'm going to do all the things. And then the nausea hits and the food aversions hit, and you can't eat anything.
Just eating saltines.
I honestly was living, what was I? So I'm trying not to do gluten because it doesn't agree with me. So that cut out all like the comforting kinds of foods, which was unfortunate. But honestly, it's such a blur even looking back on. But I was living off, like, Greek yogurt was my saving grace. For some reason, that did not make me feel sick. So I did a lot of Greek yogurt. I don't honestly know what I was eating. It was
not a lot of anything.
Not a lot of anything. And it was really hard, because then it's this vicious cycle where like you feel bad, like you don't have energy. I mean, because you're pregnant, but also because you're not eating well. And, you know, and then I was just feeling guilty about not getting all the nutrients in. Then eggs grossed me out. And to me, eggs are like a superfood. So I didn't eat eggs for like 16 weeks. And that was really sad. My lesson that I learned was, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it in the first trimester. Like, do the best you can. You'll make up for it in the second and third. You hopefully went into pregnancy with good nutrient reserves.
Well, in your case, you did, because I saw you eating that liver.
I was eating liver up until the moment I found out I was pregnant. Yeah, and that honestly, like, I kept holding on to that. I was like, I did a good job.
Yes.
So,
and you do the best you can.
And you do the best you can. And your baby's going to be fine.
Also, it's kind of your initiation into this whole universe of not really being in control.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard.
Yeah, that is a good point. I learned that a lot going through what I went through with my partner who passed away, was just giving up control. And that actually really helped during my first trimester, because I just had to surrender, and I had experience doing that. It wasn't easy, but I had flexed that muscle before, and so I was gentle on myself. And it helps to have, you know, like, my midwife told me the same thing of, like, don't stress out about it. Like, you went in with good reserves, you know. My husband too, you know, he's like, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. So, you know, people just reminding you along the way was very helpful. But yeah, for anybody who needs to hear it, don't stress out.
Yeah, just get through it.
Just get through it. It'll get better.
Did you find any remedies that kind of would help taper morning sickness at all, or not really?
You know, I was coming in for acupuncture, and that was, I'm not gonna lie, like, not super helpful. Mm-hmm. I've had experience treating people where it did help, and others, you're just past the point. Mm-hmm. For me, I was past the point. But what did help was really, like, not having full meals, kind of just snacking throughout the day, and finding things that were high enough in fat and or protein. Protein was really hard for me because all animal food was disgusting. Mm-hmm. But like, the Greek yogurt was really helpful because it helped to, like, stabilize my blood sugar just enough to, like, get me to the next snack. What I realized was really helpful was not trying to eat 3 meals a day. It was just constantly graze throughout the whole day. Small portions. Don't let your stomach get too empty or too full. Eating something right before bed. Mm. And then I would wake up at like 3 a.m. and go take like 4 or 5 bites of cottage cheese or Greek yogurt, or if there was like a piece of cheese in the middle of the night to kind of get me through to the morning. I had to eat like right upon waking. That helped. For me, brushing my teeth was really hard because it kind of like stimulated that gag reflex. So I ate something first before brushing my teeth, and that helped. But honestly, it was a struggle. It was a struggle the whole way through. And there were like little things here and there, like the snacking all day long.
But that's a good practice. If you snack all day long and you don't let yourself get super hungry or super full, then that keeps your hormones pretty balanced. Yeah. Because if someone's, you know, starving, then that's, you know, a plummet of blood sugar. And that can be really tough. It's funny when you talk about nutrition. A lot of my clients that I see, Western doctors don't even utter a word about nutrition. And to me, it's such a missed opportunity because you're building a human being, you know? And it just seems like, talk about like wanting a sense of control or a sense of autonomy, like what you eat really does have an impact not just on you but on the living creature inside of you, you know?
Totally.
And I know midwives are different. I'm sure your midwife talks to you about nutrition too. Yes. But I find that a lot of my clients, they don't realize how much fat and how much protein, like you can't really overdo it in either of those. But you can definitely overdo it with the sugar and the carbs and, you know, those are the comfort things. Yeah. Those tend to taste better.
Yeah, which is why the first trimester is such a conundrum to me, because it seems so antithetical to like what the body wants to be doing.
Right.
But yeah, the proteins and the fats, they're the most important for a baby, but also for making the mom feel good too. Mm-hmm. So.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much stigma around consuming fat. Mm-hmm. I find that can be sort of an uphill battle with some of my clients, because they hear the word fat and they think, oh, I don't want that. Mm-hmm. You know, that's going to make me fat. I'm like, no. Opposite. Yeah. It's the opposite. And you can't really overdo it on the fat, because from my perspective as an educator, fat is what grows the baby's brain. Mm-hmm. It's brain chemistry, neurology, you know?
Yeah, what I find sometimes helps, because I run into the same thing too with my patients, just putting the word healthy on it, healthy fats, can kind of change the narrative or whatever idea they have of fat in their brain. You know, like getting a good amount of healthy fats, and that sometimes can be like, oh, okay, yeah, an avocado, I could do that, or salmon, I could do that, egg yolks, you know?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think I use the word good.
Good fats.
Good fats. Yeah. Can you talk about the importance of heat within the body as it relates to female health?
Yeah. Okay, so especially around our period, and then also if we're trying to conceive, warmth is a very important component. You know, around your cycle, it's kind of intuitive, right? Like you have cramps, you want to put a heating pad on. The way that we think about warmth in the body as it relates to women's health is really kind of looking at the uterus. The Chinese name for uterus translates to baby palace.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
I think is so cool. So you kind of start to think about your uterus as a baby palace, whether you want to have babies or not. But keeping that environment like warm and cozy is the best way to increase fertility and also decrease any like painful symptoms that you might experience around your period. And so what we like to recommend in Chinese medicine is always wearing socks on your feet when you're walking around, like at home. If you have cold tile floors, you want to keep the bottom of your feet warm, because that's where the kidney meridian begins, is the sole of your foot. And so it has a direct line up to your kidneys, which, as we now know, are important for fertility, as well as your low back. So keeping that area warm as well. And then drinking like warming beverages and eating warming foods are also really supportive for digestion as well, but also for hormone support. So we tend to like to avoid smoothies and salads and raw, cold foods. If you're experiencing any kind of digestive issues, no smoothies, no salads, and opt for more like warming cooked foods. So broths, soups, stews, teas, things like that are much easier on the digestive system and help to nurture that warmth within the body. That's kind of how we look at warmth, is really just creating that warm, cozy environment, which, you know, from a more Western perspective, I guess you could say increasing circulation and blood flow to the uterus. But yeah, that's the importance of warmth.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because, and I'm sure we'll get into postpartum in a second, but, you know, a lot of times us Westerners think that if we drink a cold beverage, it cools us down.
Right.
But it actually does the opposite sometimes. It actually keeps our internal body temperature elevated, but not necessarily retaining the heat. Mm-hmm. And I talk to clients about postpartum and telling them to avoid cold foods as much as they can in postpartum, just because, as you said, with Chinese medicine, it depletes the qi, and in order to keep the heat in the body and to keep some of the energy and within, not consuming cold things. But is that true in Chinese medicine and in postpartum as well?
Yes, it's paramount in postpartum, because you become like a portal between worlds when you give birth. And not only do you become a portal, but you also lose a lot of blood and qi in that process. And so you're in a very open state, very open and vulnerable state when you've just given birth. And that is an opportunity for cold it sounds weird, but we say cold and wind to invade and enter the body, because there isn't a lot of blood in the vessels and there isn't a lot of chi in the body. So when you're in a more like empty or deficient state, like a postpartum woman is, you're more vulnerable to cold entering the body. And so if you're also then consuming cold things, you're kind of just like pushing more into that deficiency, and you're not doing yourself any favors in terms of building back up the reserves of the body with warm, circulating, nourishing foods.
What is the significance of wind in Chinese medicine?
So wind is an interesting one. So just as we have 5 elements, we have 5 pathogens, and those are wind, cold, heat, dryness, dampness. The best way to think about wind, we all know like what wind is, right? You can't see it, but you can see the manifestations of it. You can see the leaves on a tree move and know, okay, it's windy outside. In the body, what that looks like is like tremors, seizures, twitches, what else? Strokes, things like that. Things that move quickly and come and go are the kind of the qualities of wind. And so when the blood vessels are empty or deficient, there's space in them for wind to invade. So
can you think of any example with a postpartum person, wind entering their body? Is that like they're up doing too much around the house and
it's more of like an environmental thing. So it would be like you're just an open kind of vessel when you've given birth, and if it's windy outside, this is kind of a way you can think about wind. When you catch a cold, that's a wind invasion. You can either have wind heat or wind cold, so either like a fever or a head cold. That's why in Chinese medicine we're always saying like cover your neck with a scarf, because wind can invade in the back of your neck and you can catch a cold. So it's like a kind of like a little old
that totally makes sense.
So when you are postpartum, you are more susceptible to wind invasion. So your immune system's depleted. You are more susceptible to getting sick.
For sure. Because you're not sleeping.
You're not sleeping. You're just depleted.
Yeah.
So that's a state where wind can invade very easily.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
What about babies? How does Chinese medicine fit in with infants? Do you do any work on babies?
Typically we don't do, you absolutely can. I remember my cousin she has a 5-year-old now, but when she was about 3, I was treating her mom, my cousin, and she was so interested in it and she wanted a needle, and so I was like, okay, we can do a little needle. And I needled her stomach 36, which is like a really just gentle point, and she loved it. So you can, but typically we don't, because
kids move.
Kids move. They can sit still for very long. But usually we say kids have a lot of good yang qi, which is like they're resilient, they're healthy. If they are sick, they usually get over it pretty quickly. They have good upright qi is kind of what we say. If they are experiencing something, their bodies are so resilient that usually we don't want to interfere too much. There absolutely is pediatric acupuncture. I don't know if pediatric acupuncturists work on infants. There are more gentle techniques, like a Japanese technique called shonishin, which is using like a silver or gold instrument to gently kind of stimulate the meridians. So there's no needles involved, but it's more like, I guess, kind of like acupressure-like, where you're just kind of on the skin, on the surface of the skin, utilizing the meridian systems. So it's a much more gentle approach because they don't really need a whole lot.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. They come into this world and they're healthy and strong and resilient. And that makes sense. What about postpartum anxiety and depression?
That's a really good topic. The way that we would look at it from a Chinese medicine perspective, and again, everybody is different, but if we're making generalizations, so like we said, during the postpartum time, you're in a really deficient state. You've lost a lot of blood, you've lost a lot of qi. It's all about like nourishing the mother back up. And so Postpartum depression and anxiety usually can happen from what we call blood deficiency. Anxiety can have a lot of roots to it. One of those roots can be blood deficiency. So that's kind of another example of how Chinese medicine, we look at the individual, right? Like,
oh my gosh, how amazing. What a concept that anxiety can come from different places.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Right. Yeah. So in someone's case, their anxiety might be due to blood deficiency, and that you can think of it as like, well, I'll just say like another reason can be like too much heat, right, in the body, or another reason we can say there's like a Shen disturbance, which might have been more of like a trauma-based thing. In the postpartum case, usually blood deficiency, because we've gone through this event, we've lost a lot of blood. When we don't have enough blood to nourish the heart, we can experience things like anxiety or insomnia. Usually those are the two main things when we look at what heart blood deficiency looks like. But from a Chinese medicine perspective, we have this concept of Shen, again, loosely translates to spirit, and that resides in our heart. It's different than our soul, but it's an aspect of our spirit that lives in our heart. And the heart is the governor of blood, and so when we don't have enough blood in the heart, the Shen can float upwards. It's not anchored by the blood. It floats upwards more towards the mind. So that's when you start to get things like ruminating thoughts, a busy mind, trouble sleeping, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, all of those types of things that can come with anxiety.
Well, I think that's even true for anyone going through labor. Because when someone is anxious or a little nervous of the unknown, they immediately go into their head.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really
heart.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels like it's safer in the head, when really we need the mom to be in her body. So she needs to be in an environment that makes her feel safe and confident.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's really hard to allow your body to get more grounded in the body and less in the mind.
Yeah. Yes, it's a practice for sure. And if you're already blood deficient, then it's an even bigger hurdle, perhaps. Depression is similar, although we would throw the kidneys into the mix a little bit as well. Again, Jing, Qi, Yin, Yang, you lose a lot in pregnancy and birth.
Yes. And maybe even grief.
Yeah, grief.
Because, I don't know, postpartum, we always talk about anxiety and depression, and sometimes that really is the case. But I think what I witness over and over again is just periods of grief. Grief when someone is trying to get pregnant, grief when someone is pregnant, grief after the baby is born. And it's not that there aren't good things happening and that it's all bad. It's just there is. Yeah.
Grief is a big piece of it too. And so for that, if that's more of what the mother is experiencing, then we look to the lungs. Because that's the emotion. Grief and sadness are the emotion tied to the lung system and large intestine, and the lungs and large intestine are all about letting go. It's like that exhale, or being able to have a bowel movement, like the letting go. And so sometimes when we're having trouble letting go or trouble with the change, then we look to the lungs. So again, it's very individual, but generally speaking, that's kind of how we would approach it. But also, from a more, it's Eastern and Western, but again, like talking about that blood deficiency is nutrient reserves and nutrient depletion. And when you're in a deficient state in your nutrients, mood becomes a big thing to contend with, because if your body doesn't feel like it's being taken care of and it's in a state of security, right? If it feels like we don't have enough nutrients, we're in a state of scarcity, it goes into that fight or flight, which creates anxiety and sometimes depression. So a lot of working with postpartum mothers is really, I'm sure as you do in your work too, it's about getting them nourishing meals to help replenish the blood and qi that they've lost, so that they don't have that flightiness to them or that low energy to them.
Yeah, for sure. You are in such a time of transition right now, and I feel like this is so special that I get to talk to you right where you're on, the cliff of this new change, this new season. How do you feel going into this experience of pregnancy with birth on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I mean, I'm really excited. I think I'm excited to be pregnant. I'm excited to give birth. I've been trying not to consume too much information, but
how did you land on who you chose as a provider?
I knew I wanted a midwife. I was born in a hospital, and my mom, she had an unmedicated birth. She said it was like the most beautiful spiritual experience. Yeah, she had a really profound experience giving birth to me. But then I had to be rushed to the NICU, and I was choking on some amniotic fluid, but they didn't know that what was going on, and I stopped breathing. And so it was like a very traumatic day or so. And so that story has always been with me when thinking about how I want to give birth and where I want to give birth. You know, so I always had in the back of my mind, like, oh, if I'm not in a hospital and God forbid something happens. But going into, you know, thinking about trying to get pregnant, you know, I was like, where am I going to feel the best? And it was clear to me that was at home, which is not the case for everybody, but for me it was and is. So I knew I wanted to go the midwife route. And you had given me some amazing suggestions, and I just kind of went down the rabbit hole of finding different providers and interviewing different providers, and to be honest, they were all amazing.
And they're all so different.
Yeah, which is really cool. But my husband and I, we were like, they're really good, but I don't know, it doesn't feel like we found the one yet. And so I kept reaching out to people, and Alex, my midwife, within the first 2 seconds of our conversation, my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, oh yeah, she's the one. So it was just kind of like a soul knowing, I think.
Intuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's been amazing to work with, and she's really made me excited about this process. And also, I've just been, you know, doing some reading about home births and listening to some podcasts about home births. And I know that everybody has such a different experience, but I'm just really excited to see what my experience will be. Yeah, so I'm really excited about being pregnant. I'm really excited about giving birth, even though I know it's going to be intense. The interesting thing that I think has come up in the past month or so is like this almost a mama bear energy that's taken over that I was not expecting to happen quite so soon, of just feeling really protective over this little guy that's growing inside of me, and imagining, you know, the first few months of his life and how I want them to be. And again, trying not to go to the control place, but to the more, I guess, preparation place of making sure that I can be fully present, making sure that my husband can be fully present. We have a puppy who's demanding and loves to be the center of attention. So I'm a little nervous about how we're going to manage.
Oh, it'll be fine.
I know.
Dogs always are, they're so good.
Really?
Yeah, they really are.
Okay.
I should get more of my clients on here, all the ones that were so worried about their animal.
Please do. I need stories.
Because they end up being like protectors, you know, of the baby. But yeah, and it's an adjustment definitely for the animal.
Yeah, she's in for a rude awakening.
But I bet you she already knows you're pregnant. They usually can smell.
I know. I've been wondering if she knows or if she's just a complete psychopath.
How old is she?
She's just over a year.
Oh,
yeah,
cute.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, it seems like you're already on such a good trajectory of having such a profound, amazing experience of birth, because you are following what your body is telling you you need and what is going to ultimately make you feel the most safe, and trusting a midwife that, again, is going to help you feel safe. That's huge, because a lot of people, they follow, you know, what the status quo is, and I don't think people always recognize what their choices are. And it's so great to hear that you have really taken pause and figured out what you need to get you through this experience and to make you feel more confident going into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like, that was a big lesson I learned with everything with my partner is like, what feels right for you? Because there were so many options of treatments and this and that and experimental things and, you know, so many choices to make. And ultimately, the choices that he made and we made from a place of like, this feels right, I have zero regrets about, you know? So that has been helpful in this journey too, of what you were explaining. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lina, for sharing. And I know that this conversation is really going to be informative for so many people, just understanding the basics of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on my Instagram, which is at resonant.healing, and my website is resonant-healing.com. So those are probably the two best places to find me.
Great. And I'm sure you're going to go on maternity leave, but are you accepting new patients at this time?
Right now, I'm not taking on new people.
Oh, she's busy. But you have amazing...
But I have two acupuncturists, amazing acupuncturists who work with me, and they are accepting new patients, and they're wonderful, and we work super closely together. So it's definitely like a resonant healing family. And I always say, if you want to get in to see me, but I'm booked, please see one of them because they're equally as amazing.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I can't wait to hear about your birth experience, and maybe we'll get you back on to share your experience.
Oh,
that would be
That
amazing.
would be so fun. I would love that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share with friends and family, and stay tuned for the next episode.